Hola, bona tarda, benvinguts, com de costum, al cicle Converses d'Arquitectura, organitzat per Arquitectes per Arquitectura i Trespa, que és qui ens acull. Bé, simplement avui, and now I think I'm going to change to English, so as James and also Hans can understand us. Well, the topic today, as you see, it is called autonomy. Okay, so for about that, we have Anna Puigjaner, who's going to explain about it later, but I was just thinking of explaining a short story, and it is trying to compare two buildings. One of them is La Pedrera in Barcelona. It's this famous building by Gaudí in Passeig de Gràcia. And then another building that's in Vienne, still existing, designed in between 1926 and 28, and it is the Wittgenstein house. Okay, designed by a philosopher, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and an architect, Paul Engelmann. Okay, maybe you know about this house. It's kind of Adolf Loos style. Okay, so there's been a Catalan poet called Pere Jaume that has been saying that La Pedrera, okay, it is trying to express anything that exists from the highest of peaks, okay, to the bottom of the ocean, thanks to the parabolic system. Okay, so anytime you go there, you'll feel that when you are in any of the apartments, what you feel is being underwater, okay? And what's the attic? It's just on the surface. So if you see this building, it's based on metaphors, it's based on evocation, and what's finally producing is an allegory of the natural world that in the hands of Gaudí, you know, that it's of course connected with this idea of God and the Catholic religion, right? So if you see, it is a building made of evocation. Okay, if we go now to Vienna and we see about this house in Vienna, designed by this philosopher Wittgenstein and his friend Paul Engelmann, you'll see that this house is not working on evocation at all. It's not working on representation, but it's more working on what's known as tautology, okay, which is repeating the same significance once and again, even if this has been told already, okay? So what happens to the house is that the door is a door and the window is a window. It's not something that would resemble the natural world or any other aspect of life, but something that belongs to the field and to the realm of architecture, okay? So in a time of crisis like the one we're living, it seems that we have two choices. One of them is adaptation, okay, like becoming green, sustainable, and many other solutions that we have. And there seems to be another one, which is somehow resistance, right? And this resistance might come from architecture itself, okay? So that's the whole thing. For Anna, she's one of our best architects in Barcelona, and well, she has an office with Guillermo, who's there too. It's called Mayo Office of Architecture. She's editor of Quaderns de Arquitectura in the Association of Architects here in Barcelona. And well, she's been recently shortlisted for an important prize in the US that's called Wheelwright, exactly. And if she gets that, well, he'll get to travel around as a postdoc, okay, because she's got a postdoc, a doctoral thesis about kitchenless. I don't know if this is something that you'll have the time to explain or to refer to, okay. Well, that's all. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you, Enric, for the super kind introduction. And I'm just gonna thank you all for being here today. And as you will see, we have today three presentations from three really different practices in architecture that all of them are, at least from my point of view, super interesting. What I'm gonna do is simply be really rough and introduce the guest, and I'm gonna try to talk about this concept of autonomy that Enric was already introducing a little bit and pointing out at the end, trying to open up a discussion, and of course, trying to invite you to join us with it. So, and you will have to excuse me because there's so many hours around, these people has been awarded so many times that it was impossible to memorize their bios. So I end up writing them down, and I promise that I have shortened it a lot, shortened them a lot, not to be boring. But and I think that none of them demand an introduction, but I think that it's also important to remember where they come from and what they do. So let me introduce first to Eduardo Cadaval. Eduardo Cadaval runs an office with Clara Solà-Morales, Cadaval and Solà-Morales. They met in Harvard, and after they moved to New York, where they founded in 2003 their office, and moved both to Barcelona and Mexico City, so they have this international character in 2005. They're both professors, and actually Clara is visiting professor at the MIT in the United States. And their work places itself in between those two walls, the academic and the professional. And I think that you like to explain it like that. Among their work, and I would stand out, the well-known TDA House, or TDA House, or the Tepoztlán Lounge, and excuse me if I don't pronounce it right. And they have won numerous awards, including the prestigious Bauvelt Prize in Munich in 2009, the Design Award New York 2008, and many, many others. And the last probably would be the prize of Ibero-American Architecture Biennial in 2012. They have recently won an incredibly enormous competition of 50,000 square meters, and I'm seriously, of housing and commercial development in Mexico City. So please, Eduardo.
I will not talk about any project. We would just put the projects that I might refer in the background as architectural pornography. I was tempted of not using any images, and I will prefer that in a certain moment. But in any case, just to when I received the idea of autonomy and to talk about it as a topic, I thought that in reality I don't believe in autonomy, and I don't think there's such thing as an autonomy, that you are always related with something. At the same time, I don't believe in contextualism or in that we are all part of the same gender karma thing. So I think that the important part is like semi-autonomy. Like, how can you move? It would be very pretentious to say that you are autonomous and that your thinking or your ideas might be autonomous. But at the same time, you want to put your voice or you want to highlight the tone of your voice so that you can build your own discourse. I thought that we are semi-autonomous in many cases. We are semi-autonomous in operation. We work between Mexico City and Barcelona, and we work mainly between Mexico and Spain. Most of our buildings in Spain are in Spain, not in Barcelona. In Mexico, because it's such a centralized country, we work in many different cities, not just in Mexico City. So many commissions go to Mexico City, but we're building Cancún, Acapulco, Tepoztlán, Malinalco, Estado de México, Puerto Escondido, in many, La Paz, many areas around the country. So these semi-autonomous conditions from the context in which we operate, I think is key in understanding our response to fashion, in a way. And fashion in Barcelona in the last 2 years is all about bricks and simplicity and materials and of course, because we come from 6 years of excess and everything. And then in Mexico it's the opposite, no? Now we're finally rich, for 3 years, so we want to be exuberant. And then, so how can you place yourself between these things? At the same time, we are also semi-autonomous in both our formation and our relation with academia. We both teach at the UPC here, at the ETSAP, but we also both teach either in Mexico or in the States in different conditions. Clara is not here because she's in Boston now teaching. So that also gives us another, it's almost like a paranoid thing, because it also brings another element to the table. So how can you mix these things? So I would say that in our case, autonomy from the place in which we operate. I love to live in Barcelona, but I will hate to live here full time, because I grew up in a huge city, so for me this is like compact. And then I go to Mexico City, and then I get sick of the traffic and the noise, and they are not civilized, and so it's in between. You know, you get tired of something, and then you fly back and forth. Even there's no, in our case, there's no logic period of time to be in Mexico or in here. It's not that I fly every 5 weeks, then every 4 weeks, then every 3 weeks, then every 2 weeks. And then I start again every 5 weeks, every 3 weeks, because that we realize that that's the most efficient way to deal with construction sites. So that would be in case of our formation and in the way we operate the office. Then the projects, I will divide, and is the only scheme that the slides or the images have hierarchy, is we work mainly in 3 different aspects or 3 different scales. One would be ephemeral work. The other one will be residential, and what we call small paradises. Don't ask me why, but every time that someone calls us, it's just an amazing site. It's like, I always tell Clara that we still need to prove that we can do a good building in a constrained place. I mean, to do houses where we do them is just like, whatever you do, it will be fine. In the case of the ephemeral work, we believe in a semi-autonomous attitude or strategy towards 2 things. First, the curatorial discourse, because we do a lot of exhibitions, and we are even asked by the curators to bring our own agenda to the table, so that the exhibitions become part of the curatorial discourse, part of our spatial discourse, and then also a semi-autonomous condition in relationship with the context, interior, or like in this case, exterior. Because it's like an ephemeral event, how can you bring a different condition to that place? In the case of the residential work, or the houses that we have been very lucky to do and that we still do, it has become a constant energy and a constant commission in our office. We always have at least 2 houses or something like that were designed with other things. And that it's a semi-autonomous condition in relationship with the landscape. The easiest thing would say that is totally autonomous, but it's not. I cannot tell you what that window looks at, because it's very personal. In the same way that the TDA name of the house, we did a fake name, because we said that TDA stands for Terreno Después de Acapulco, and that's not true. But the origin of TDA is very personal, so we never put it out to the discourse. But in a way, all these houses respond. They are not autonomous at all, but at the same time, they are trying to make a mark so that you get a different reading of the different contexts. It depends on light, it depends on orientation, it depends on views, it depends on the sun, it depends on geography, and we always say that you know, a squirrel or a bear will not get mad about form, that you can be very exuberant because I don't know, an elephant will not care about it because they, at least, or they don't have any way to communicate us. And then the last scale in which we work that probably will get there. So this is a series of houses. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Next, 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 next. Well, this is in Spain. This is in Mexico under construction. Go, yeah, this is nice. If you go back, no, to that stone wall, there was not a single drawing made for that wall. So it was just decisions on site. So even we have a semi-autonomous, we believe a lot in drawings and construction documents, but sometimes basically the client, if you can go back once, the client hires us to do this series of pavilions. And he asked us that, no, forget about the garage and all the surroundings. These will be built by a local worker. And go to the next one. Yeah, that local worker, it's just amazing. It's unbelievable. So what we ended up doing is an amazing close relationship with him about just talking. So I will go to the construction site and we will say, okay, let's do the wall here. Let's do the wall in this way. And he will do three options of stones, and we will test it, and then I will go 1 week later, and he will do it. And this is, when I saw the result of this thing, is that why we keep drawing stuff, you know, so anxiously. But in any case, if you go to the, for me, these houses can be even exuberant. We even measure them depending on the context. So for example, if you go back a couple, no, two more, more, one, more. This one. So for example, this house is like a little bit too much for Spain. It's exuberant and it's, but in the US, they just love it. Every time that we go to the US, no, we don't care about the rest. You know, let's really talk about the X house because that's da 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 da. And then we go to Mexico and it's a similar thing. In Mexico, they love our Spaniard houses. In Spain, they love our Spanish houses. So it's sorry. In Spain, they love our Mexican houses. So it's always a thing in between in which you ended up trying to build your own personality, trying to be semi-autonomous from all the different inputs that you put in. And finally, the last series of ideas or scale, keep this Acapulco, that's Spain, Mexico, 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 these things. Like 3 years ago, we started trying to move the office from not being trapped in just doing houses. You all know that if you do burgers, no one will call you for a sushi or for a taco. I'm not saying that burgers might be better than sushi or taco, but you sometimes would like to do tacos or sushi. So we since the beginning, we started to, what we did as a strategy is like, instead of, I think we have done, I don't know, 5 competitions in our entire life. Because basically we got a commission and then we said, let's concentrate on that commission. Now seeing it backwards, it was also a sacrifice in terms of like, okay, let's keep it small, let's do it this way, and then because we believe in the build space, and then let's try to move to larger buildings. So we started with ephemeral work that we still do, then houses, and now we're happy that we were able to jump to buildings. All these buildings are either being built or they will start construction in the next year or so. And I think if you keep going, you will see that they are way more shy. They are less exuberant. Whenever we get to the city, we understand that we cannot make so much noise. You know, that a tree will not matter about our houses like this. But if we get to the city, you need to bring certain order and certain certain constraint. So, so whenever we work in a city, if you keep going, a couple more, it's all about structure. This is the last, this is and another project are the last two, but this is a built house. It's also a semi-autonomous project in the sense that all this, half of the building was existing. If you go back one, so this, the original house was from here to here. We replicated, they had this really nice patio that in reality had a roof and everything, we cleaned it. And then we replicated the strategy of the back patio. And even we didn't want it to create like a very clear idea of the extinction between new and old. Walter Benjamin used to say that, that architecture was a discipline for a distracted public. That whenever you go to a museum, you're looking to a painting and then you're, but whenever you're walking in a city, you don't want to be like, with every building. So the idea is that a person that is not an expert in architecture will not notice any difference. If you go one more here. So this is the new part, and obviously any architect will know that this is new, that there was no way to construct this in the 19th century in Mexico. Then we added a layer of glass, kind of trying to separate the existing white vase from the new two towers. It's kind of a big building, to be honest. Like from outside you don't see anything. One more, let's see. Well, changing programs, and then all the apartments keep going. All the apartments are different. And then if you keep going, yeah, bam, 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 bam. And then this is the project that we just finished. It's a big building. It's half of a block in Mexico City, in La Roma neighborhood. But basically, the urban condition of the building was perfect. So we didn't touch it because there was no reason to do it. And the only thing, if you go for one more, the only thing that we did was we created a patio with new circulation, because in reality, if I show you an elevation of this building, you will be impressed, because it's like 50 centimeters tilted one side, and there's no way to balance it. The only thing that you need to do is like, these buildings in Mexico sink every year about 10 centimeters, because they are all built on a lake or a former lake. So what you need to do whenever you have a building like this is to balance it. It will keep sinking, it will keep be twisted, but the only thing that you don't want is that so it twists more that it breaks the point of equilibrium. So in reality, this patio and these big concrete walls, what they're doing is balancing the structure so that it will remain tilted, but it will not collapse, because it will go down directly to the ground. And then next one. So knowing that we had to do that reconstruction, we created a patio, we created the circulation system. One more. Whenever the existing house or the existing building was in good condition, we left it as it was. Next one. So this is just to prove that we also follow the fashion of bricks and austerity and authenticity, which of course I don't believe in, just to make the point. Next one. But we just cleaned the building, we restructured it. This was more even an economical condition, because they didn't have money. They didn't have money even to paint the entire thing, so we just restored it. The only parts that are restored are the ones that are structurally necessary. One more, a couple more. And the rest is just like that. So at the end, I would say that our condition, that we enjoy certain autonomy as long as we belong to something else, because if not, it's kind of boring. And that's it.
Next speaker is going to be James Binning. Did I pronounce it?
Binning, yeah.
Binning. From Assemble Studio. Assemble is a collective based in London, and I'm pretty sure you all know pretty well, who work across the field of art, architecture, and design. They began working together in 2010, when the team comprised of 18 members, which I think is quite particular of you and of your work and the way you work. When they built a temporary cinema in an abandoned petrol station in London's Clerkenwell.
Clerkenwell, yeah.
Okay. Assemble's work in practice seeks to address the typical disconnection between the public and the process by which places are made. Assembly Works seeks to actively involve the public, and that's quite particular of their work, as both participants and collaborators at the same level. They have recently been awarded with the prestigious award, the Turner Prize, the most, let's say, is one of the most UK's important art award for his work at Granby 4th Street in Liverpool, which involves the renovation of 10 houses. I don't know if you're going to talk about that.
Yeah, I'll talk about that.
And a series of empty shops. So let me just leave my. Oh, you have.
So I've got a mic actually. Move this over here. Yeah, hi. So I'm James. I'm one of the 15 members now of the Assemble Collective. We've got rid of a few and picked up a couple of others. And we're based in a place called Sugar House Studios in East London, where we kind of share space with a range of people, from kind of carpenters, product designers, kind of small makers and businesses. So it's a very kind of mixed, varied working environment, and that's something which kind of we really enjoy in the way that we work, and I think it comes through in some of the projects that we're kind of doing. And our work over the past 5 years since we started has kind of covered quite a range of scales, starting from kind of furniture commissions, things for a public park, to kind of looking at 1960s and 70s brutalist playgrounds, and kind of looking at their theory through a kind of an exhibition where they were reappropriated as these kind of soft forms. A kind of temporary theatre space for a theatre in Chichester. Sorry, I'm just going to set a timer because I have a tendency to ramble on. I know we're tight for time. So this was our kind of first project for a client, the first two we did, which was self-initiated. So that's the original theatre kind of on the left. And setting up kind of a library of tools. One of the things we've kind of done more recently is to start to try to set up organisations alongside the project. So this was a kind of public making space in North London, and an adventure playground, which was kind of originally an art commission in East Glasgow, near where the Commonwealth Games sites were. And increasingly kind of looking to do larger projects. This is our kind of largest project at the moment, a new gallery for Goldsmiths, which is an art college in London, kind of turning it into a public art gallery, and civic spaces as well. So the first kind of permanent project that we did 4 years ago was looking at this kind of lovely piece of public realm in kind of outer London, and trying to kind of use a very limited budget to kind of enrich that space and bring some of the kind of civic uses in the buildings around the square out into it, so it became this kind of social, sort of civic heart of the town, and trying to find, I guess, ways maybe of representing kind of overlooked or interstitial sites, seeing the value in things that maybe others don't or others kind of might miss, and often that's through these quite sort of strange or like beguiling kind of material treatments. Very interested in kind of the process and the way in which that process might be a way of involving kind of other people, kind of getting them involved in projects as a way of, I guess, challenging them to reimagine how they've come to conceive of a place or kind of familiarise themselves with it and understand it. So I'm going to talk primarily about two projects today. The first one we did, which is the Cinerolium, and then kind of our ongoing work in Liverpool, which is our kind of the main project we're up to at the moment. So the Cineroleum really was this kind of empty filling station, which we'd walk past. Some of us would walk past it on the way to work. Straight after kind of graduating in 2009, we'd gone into architecture practice as these sort of kind of hopeful young graduates, and it was a very tough time to graduate. I think the profession really was kind of struggling. Architects were really struggling to kind of get and keep work, and I think we all felt that kind of work culture, the reason we'd sort of signed up to be architects maybe, and work on the kind of projects we kind of hoped to, those opportunities were very few and far between. And the kind of frustrations that we all felt through having to work on projects where it felt like there was very little autonomy or very little agency for the architect, trying to do something for ourselves where we could set the terms on which we'd work, and which we could all work on kind of together, really, in the spirit that we had kind of worked on projects as students in a kind of more collaborative way. And so identifying this as an opportunity, something that a developer was kind of sat on, he couldn't do anything with it, with the kind of land values as they were. The bottom had fallen out of the market in 2009. So we approached him, kind of put together a document and sold him our vision for what we'd like to do with this space for a limited amount of time, within the kind of amount of time we could kind of do something without having to have planning permission. We could do with a very limited budget, which we could kind of raise all by putting in a couple of £100, like 250 euros each, basically, we all put in to raise a budget, and got a small grant of about 6,000 euros as well. So it was very, very like lean, but it also meant that we had to go out and ask a lot of other people to kind of come in and help us. So in that sense, it was kind of trying to reclaim some control over the way in which we worked, or how we felt like the process of realising kind of projects might be different to the one which we'd kind of encountered in practice of kind of producing information, handing it to a contractor, it going off and being built, and you feeling quite removed from that. So trying to sort of reclaim some of that authorial kind of command, I guess, but also extend that process out to as many other people as possible, because we're going to need to do that if we're going to get built, because we didn't have any money to pay anyone. And that's after sort of 8 weeks of construction, the result was the Cineroleum. So it kind of took these kind of typical tropes of historic cinema, the sign, the curtain, some flip-up seats, and remade them in very kind of cheap materials. So this kind of Tyvek curtain, which is usually used as a roofing underlay. The scaffold boards are all basically free because they couldn't be used in industry anymore if they've got too many notches taken out. And then trying to sort of give it a richness by borrowing some proper cinema seats, the kind of, the smart ones that all the scaffolding board ones are kind of aspiring to be, from a local museum. And then programming the space, kind of choosing the films to cope with the fact that there was a main road 5 yards behind the screen. There was lots of noise, there'd be sirens going back and forth during performances, and trying to kind of use those kind of qualities, those sort of incidental moments, as a way that would sort of enrich the experience for people that came to visit the cinema. And then there was this kind of moment at the end when the kind of curtain would go up, we'd all go down a little staircase at the back, run outside, and like hoist some ropes, and as the credits rolled down, the kind of curtain went up, and it felt a bit like sort of having your pants pulled down in public or something. It's like this sort of big reveal where suddenly, from having sort of been the audience member, you were suddenly on show, and you get people kind of standing on the other side of the road, kind of waiting for this thing to sort of happen. But there was a very, real emphasis in trying to sort of reclaim back some of the joy, or some of the agency in terms of like how the projects were realised, whether that's through these kind of taking some of the school furniture that we could pick up on eBay and making these kind of marquetry inlaid pieces of furniture, or taking down all the crappy sort of suspended ceiling tiles and building a homemade vacuum forming machine to try to kind of sort of change them or imprint them in some way, or setting up these production lines where they're very simple drawings, which meant anybody could kind of come on site for a couple of minutes or a lunch break, or a few days, and pick up this kind of manual, and just through a series of basically like very simple cuts, drilled holes with one size of drill bit, you know, we didn't know how to make anything at this point, so it had to be pretty simple if we were going to build it ourselves. And you know, this was a way then of inviting other people in and taking some control over the way in which this very small temporary part of city could be made. And I think, you know, this was very much like a process of education for us. It was like going to school for a second time, really, and really sort of put forward the idea to us, at least, that, you know, if we could, if we had the kind of the tools or the opportunity, or we could make that space to be able to kind of build the city in that way at this scale, then it starts sort of a set of conversations in motion, I think, about how the city at large can be more malleable. Like, what are the opportunities to kind of try to engage at larger scales where you can still apply some of these same sorts of processes or principles? Like, what are the ways of realising structures potentially that aren't so don't rely necessarily on a formal or traditional legal relationship with the contractor, for example, or a client. So the cinema was up for 8 weeks, then it came down. It was kind of a relatively informal beginning of something. We weren't kind of organised as a company then. That kind of came later with our second project. And so sort of gradually over time, some people kind of went back to study. A small group of us kind of stuck together, didn't go back to study the next part of the course and did a competition which we won to do that town square. And so really that group is quite loose, and people have the ability or the agency to kind of move in and out. Some people are more, you know, work part-time in other practices. There are a group of sort of 12 of us who are pretty much full-time and have been for 3 years. But within that 12, sort of 6 or 7 people teach as well. So there's lots of ways in which, you know, assemble essentially as like a group of, so I'll just check the time. I'm not doing too bad. Within that group of sort of 12 people, there are opportunities for you to sort of, you know, go out and pursue an avenue of inquiry and teaching that is totally autonomous from the group. And then that group conversation really increasingly is about trying to find ways in which we can initiate or kind of change the terms on which a project might happen at a much earlier stage, like pre-brief, and be involved in those kinds of conversations prior to, so, you know, increasingly, I mean, the Goldsmiths project, for example, was a competition entry, and it's not that we wouldn't do those kinds of things again, but I think it's increasingly trying to find ways of initiating projects at a much, much earlier stage. Which is really like the situation that we found when we started working in Granby, which is this area of Liverpool. Liverpool obviously once the kind of thriving metropolitan port city, one of the great cities of the world, and had suffered in its kind of post-industrial era of huge kind of unemployment problems. So 10% of the population of the city was unemployed. The population itself was kind of halved from what it had been in its heyday. And in this particular area, Granby has historically been one of the most diverse. It's one of the places where kind of Somali sailors were kind of allowed to buy kind of property and could club together. And so it's historically been a very kind of mixed area in a city which wasn't like that kind of across its spectrum. And there were sort of riots in the 80s following that, kind of several efforts at kind of top-down regeneration from different governments, which set out very kind of sweeping plans to regenerate, essentially demolish the existing kind of Victorian terraced houses that were there and replace them with lower volume kind of new build. You know, sort of feed the construction industry really, and the communities in this area. This was a very aggressive policy, but the communities in the area generally resisted on 2 counts. One, that they valued the buildings. These were some of the kind of grandest buildings that were very symbolic of the kind of prosperity of a previous time in Liverpool's history, and the community, that this had a very sort of symbolic importance as one of the oldest kind of black populations in Europe. and one of the most diverse in the city. But this programme of managed decline from sort of successive local and national governments was very destructive. It involved kind of taking the roofs off houses, trying to let the insides kind of rot out, so you could make the case for demolition, basically, in the face of, ultimately, if people have very little left to fight for if the buildings are structurally unsound and have to be demolished. And there was this kind of admission that the streets were sort of left like war zones. And after sort of 2 decades of successive programs, it all kind of came to an end in 2011 with the final, or the most recent kind of government, it's called a Housing Pathfinder program, which was cancelled when the Conservatives came into power because it was costing so much money, and it was just swathes of demolition across not only Liverpool but many other areas of the UK. And it just, when it sort of stopped quite abruptly, that really left a void into which the remaining, I should say that originally there were 14 streets in this area, there are now 4, so 10 were demolished. And of the kind of hundreds and hundreds of families that would have lived in that area, there were only 50 residents left a few years ago. But those 50 residents were then basically left with the streets to themselves. The authority completely withdrew, would stop collecting the bins. And that really gave these residents an incredible amount of space to move into, to kind of occupy, not only in terms of the streets, which they started to kind of domesticate by extending, these very sort of simple actions of kind of visible care, just sort of cleaning and planting and painting, this quite sort of hostile security architecture, but also initiating things like kind of markets and other ways of kind of inviting people in, trying to sort of change the way that or challenge the perception that had been peddled in the media and by the council that this was a dangerous place, that this was kind of an antisocial area and it needed to be cleared to be able to sort of start anew and to regenerate itself. So it was really in this kind of void that all of this kind of license was able to be taken by the residents that were there. And the point at which we came in, we were actually working on another street about 5 minutes walk away, looking at how to refurbish some of the houses that were in the worst condition, on the basis that if you could come up with a model essentially that's cheaper than demolishing a new and then building a new, then you had a good strategy for not just this area or that street, but a whole typology of kind of dereliction across the UK. And that project was then kind of on hold because of a lot of complex politics in Liverpool. But we came in to help a community land trust that had formed, essentially of constituting those remaining 50 residents, to put together an alternative to the kind of top-down master plans that had come before and that they'd kind of really vigorously rejected. So that really involved looking at how to reuse the houses extremely cheaply. The budget for each one is about sort of 70,000 euros or something, which is not a lot when you think that most of them are kind of structurally unsound at the moment. But they are very generous in terms of their scale. They're much larger than would be the case if you demolished them and rebuilt. A strategy for the public spaces, so the streets and the high street and the shops, and also these kind of more temporary kind of pieces of physical and social infrastructure that have obviously been lost when 90% of the population moves out, things like markets or kind of shops or opportunities for employment and things like that. So this was the condition of, we selected a few of the houses that were in initially for these first 10 houses in quite good condition, actually. As you can see, these ones still got some floor and a stair in there, so something to work with on a budget. But these kind of fit-outs had to be very kind of lean. So within quite a complex political situation where these residents were given the houses by the local council, on the deal was that, don't screw these ones up and we might give you some more. So they sort of formed a land trust, which is a legal kind of group, so they could hold the houses in trust. But that's kind of quite complex and separate. It's quite an interesting idea in terms of addressing some of the problems with sort of overheating land prices or prices of housing in the UK, but it's CLTs are quite a separate thing. But the kind of fit out of these spaces had to be very simple, had to be done to what the builders kind of called, with a grin on their face, the builder's finish, which was kind of everything that they could do with their eyes closed, sort of no frills, apart from, we had some control over the specification of the paint colour. But we also tried to learn from the way in which the residents had kind of adapted and kind of made their houses homes over the years. Through, obviously they had these kind of richer, original kind of Victorian interiors that had been retained. And we set about trying to create a series of domestic furnishings which could reintroduce some of that kind of care and generosity that these original Victorian interiors had, that the kind of buildings in the worst condition had all lost. So starting with the kind of mantelpieces at the heart of the home, which were kind of made from collecting up the kind of demolition, the kind of scraps of the buildings, the slate and the brick, and kind of binding them up in these kind of pigmented concretes and kind of grinding them back as this kind of like memory, this kind of, I guess, sort of memorial to, not trying to deny or kind of forget the past that's come before, but try to find a way of looking more optimistically into the future rather than kind of move beyond the friction that had sort of defined the place over the previous 20 years, I guess. So these were all kind of like made on site in quite a messy ways with lots of testing. This range of ceramic cabinet handles, kind of doorknobs and things like that, and or you're using very sort of cheap 10p tiles that are kind of given a pattern, so just kind of trying to find ways of making use of very sort of standard materials and kind of adding something to them. And the original idea for this had been, that this might be a way of kind of building the social infrastructure of the area as well, but that hadn't been possible with those first 10 houses. There just wasn't kind of the opportunity to do it, the budget wasn't there. But with the kind of Turner Prize nomination, which came a bit out of left field, that was a real opportunity to try to bring that part of the project forward, to try to reintroduce some uses back to the high street by kind of hiring, recruiting a team of local people to kind of produce not only these original sort of these objects for the first houses, but all the kind of sort of a broader range that could be available for sale on the internet, using the kind of Turner Prize Gallery show as the kind of showroom for all of these products, that could then grow into a longer term business that would almost potentially act as the contractor for the wider redevelopment of the area when there are kind of bigger components of the construction to do. And so I guess learning from some of these principles of the first projects, which we've looked at through numerous other projects as well, but that sometimes doing a drawing for somebody and getting them to come on site and build a chair, or to cut loads of bricks in the instance of the second project, which was made out of 10,000 timber bricks, you kind of in some ways replicate a production line. You're not really giving anyone agency for doing that. You're just creating a set of rules that they follow. And it's kind of these repetitive tasks. So with all of these products, it was trying to find a way in which there was both a measure of control about the way that things were made, that they could be produced to a high standard, but that somebody could pick up these fairly kind of simple processes and then start to dictate or make decisions about the way in which they were made. So whether that's these, the degree to which they're polished, the way that you kind of put the aggregates in, they all kind of accommodate a process of chance. This is a process of kind of paper marbling technique applied to very sort of cheap standard building materials like sort of cement board, not dissimilar to Trespa or something, which is then marbled and becomes quite an unusual sort of surface for a table, or these kind of newel finial posts, kind of block printed fabrics and terracotta lampshades. So all these things which were essentially have like a mould or a jig, or designing the tool which will enable somebody else to make something in a more varied way. So the handles were kind of fired in this barbecue that really sort of DIY process, where you just fill it with sawdust, and anything else that you put in will change that coloration. So really handing somebody a set of instructions rather than kind of creating a set of repetitive processes. And this was the showroom. In the gallery, which displayed kind of all the objects, some of which worked, some of them were just sort of tests, like these kind of ceiling roses and things, which never went into production, but most of the things in there did. And so I guess that's kind of one stage of the rebuilding, hopefully, of the sort of the social infrastructure of the place, and trying to set up something which hopefully in the future we can then withdraw from at a future point, which is something kind of common to all of these organisations that we set up. So we set them up and then try to gradually take a step back so that they can run relatively autonomously free of our kind of practice. Like we're a kind of initiating force, or we use the kind of project commission to start something that others in the area can then continue. This is one of the next phases of the project in Liverpool, which is looking at one of the houses in the worst condition that would cost too much to refurbish, and turning it into this kind of shared winter garden, a kind of communal asset, which will, hopefully, kind of, again, sort of leaving that kind of bare shell as a way of serving as some sort of testimony to the condition that many of the buildings were in once all of the other ones have been kind of refurbished. That could easily kind of be lost or glossed over. And I think that's the end. So yeah, really, I guess that we work in kind of many different ways. Like none of us are qualified yet as architects, and actually that's enabled us, I think, to work through in a process which often has very kind of blurry lines, to be able to kind of approach a set of conversations as an architect or as an artist or as somebody else, just somebody who's curious about a particular situation. That actually allows us probably more autonomy than anything else. I think, very much agree with Eduardo. It's kind of in all of our projects, even that first one, which really we set out to separate ourselves or take a kind of find an opportunity which occupied a very different space or gave us a very different opportunity to the one that we had in kind of traditional practice, was totally formed by the context, by the time, by even like the arts support structure in the UK at that time, which meant we could get a grants fund. All of these things, and understanding increasingly, the Adventure Playground or something, that was trying to take a piece of arts funding which would have otherwise, the call was for a piece of public art, a sculpture to celebrate to mark in time the Commonwealth Games as a moment in Glasgow, and trying to rewrite an art commission to be an Adventure Playground as an arts project. Actually, trying to sort of work in all of these things means that we're quite difficult to categorise, I think, in some ways, and that is sort of gives us the wiggle room often to kind of reclaim some ownership and a sort of authorial control over a project, which actually I think it can be very difficult to do in the more formal architecture projects that we're involved in, and we are involved in some of those as well. So I've probably gone over time, so I'm sorry about that. But thank you.
Thank you, James. I'm quite surprised because I didn't expect the concept of autonomy of operation to come out today, and apparently it has come out in both with Eduardo and James, so how autonomy is a value in the sense of the practice itself. We can come to that after. And so let me introduce the last of our guests, last but not least. Focketyn del Río. Miguel del Río and Hans Focketyn founded Focketyn del Río in 2013, so it's a really young office in Basel. As they define themselves, is a concept-driven architectural office which pursues a constant research and development that reaches the unexpected discoveries. Quite a challenge. Their work has been recently awarded with the Foundation Award in 2014, a prize given to the most promising architectural practice in Switzerland each year. And they are actually developing a major project in the city of Basel, the refurbishment of the military barracks into a cultural center. I don't know if you can talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. So, hi everybody. I'm Miquel. I'm the Del Río of Focketyn del Río studio. As you said, we are a specific thing because we are a Swiss office with no Swiss partner, no? And that defines very much who we are, and that defines us very much in an environment. We're Switzerland, not like Spain or Catalonia in this moment, still lives on a moment of very strong administrations, and this means a lot of competitions. No? And we were lucky enough to win a very big competition in Basel, which is basically what runs the office, and that's the one that we're going to talk because we thought it was very, very good for this topic, no? Politics and architecture, or how the architect is an autonomous thing. So this is Basel. Basel is defined by the river, basically. There was a small hill here, which is where the city started. They had here some walls, and then at one point they extended to the other part. Basel is at the same time a city which is at the end of the river. This means that a lot of industries came here because then the pollution will go to the next city, of course. And this made Basel a very open city. And at the same time, Basel is a canton in itself. It's like the highest political part of Switzerland is a confederation, and Basel is a canton in itself. That makes it a very urban canton, a very progressive canton. It's every time you see referendums about not minaret or about kicking the foreigners out, in Basel they always disappear. No? And in this context, appears a competition about as you were saying before, the military barracks. No? This is Basel. We are on the other side, on Klein Basel, and you know that in Switzerland still the army exists a lot, and people have to do military service. And then, in fact, the army is basically all the civil population men that are women also. No, not still. And in this situation, the old military barracks that were built here, a building of 150 years old, are dismantled, and the soldiers go out. And of course, this is an amazing opportunity for the city. You can see that the barracks make an ensemble, no? Leave a void in the middle, and suddenly in the middle of the city appears a big void. No? And this creates a huge opportunity for Basel, starts the discussion, many projects, many opinions, and at the end the decision is laissez-faire. No? And then suddenly it starts to appear restaurants, a mosque, several venues, ateliers for artists. They build here a small gym, and at the end the building which is left is the one in the center that becomes a school. So in this context of an ensemble in the middle of the city, defining the river, which is the main public space, and defining the back stays like an empty building. So when we start the office, we said from the beginning we are a Basel office, even though we are not from Basel. But
where's he from?
Hans is originally from Belgium, but grew up in Switzerland, and I'm from Barcelona, as you can understand by my fantastic accent. So the military barracks, no? Where this part has already been activated. This part is ateliers and things, and then the big building that defines the ensemble is still not touched. So the competition asks for mainly three things. Asks one, a question that has been posed many times: what is the relationship between this and this? No? There's been already 4 competitions in this site. Do we tear this thing down? Do we make an opening? Do we open the sides? So finally, after 40 years of discussion, we opened the office, and the discussion is clear. We want to keep the building, but still allow a connection. So the first thing is connection between these two things. The second thing is, okay, this is a building that's 150 years old, no? So we need to bring it to the new standards. New standards meaning energy, and new standards meaning fire, new standards meaning comfort also. And the third thing is what we want to do here. We want to do here a creative center. Don't ask me what it is because it's still not so clear, but what is clear is that it's a place where creative people will go. This means enterprises that have that are creative related come here. It means also that we have a big sala. It means also that we have some ateliers and some co-working, and that's basically the competition. No? So as we said, we started the competition. We started the practice. Hans was a teacher at the time, had worked on the caserne as a topic, and we were like, hey Hans, it was Hans and me, you have to imagine, hey Hans, we have to do this competition, no? It's like, now we're in Basel. And then how do we do the competition? That's something that we started then and we keep doing. as I told you, Basel is a very political, leftish, and cultural environment. No? So the first thing that we did is to recruit people from the cultural scene, what we call the cultural assistants. And with them, we started discussing the project. No? And then the next thing that you do is, well, we completed the network with the classical people who does the renderings, the images, all the things that always. And then the next thing that you do is you go and visit. No? This is for us very important. Every project starts going to the place. No? That is the facade to the river. No? So it's like a lot of cameras. Every time you open one of them, it's more full, more empty, more things, less things. And that is the view to the plaza. And we were really obsessed by this line, no? Because this was explaining us, talking all the time about autonomy of architecture. No? Like the first thing that you have to do is to look at how things are built and how things are used. And this line, this fantastic yellow line that became our obsession, says that as this is a corridor for these guys, they need to leave a space in between, and they can only colonize this. And this was the Mode Institute, and you can see that they use every single square meter of this corridor. No? That's going purely again to the architecture. That's the building. The building it's very clear. It's the first, so one of the first examples of military caserne, and they work always in a similar way. You have this big corridor here. We call it corridor, but in fact it's not, with a stair, and then the camera that we were saying before. No? And I say we call it corridor, but it's not, because in fact now you see things the way you are used to see them. No? So you think, to arrive to a room, I go through a corridor. So the place before is a corridor. But in fact, this was not a corridor. In fact, the soldiers were doing here activities. One time there were too many soldiers and they were sleeping here. They will become changing rooms. They will become really an activity place. No? And that's what we said, okay, that's what we need to do. That's the goal of the competition. In the competition, the proposal or the studies were to put a stair here and a stair here. Of course, from what I said, you can imagine that people will have to go out, will have to come here, and this will become only a corridor, and therefore a not used space. No? The main concept of the project was how to relate the two things. So suddenly, by doing something as simple as putting the stairs here, what we were doing is we were saying all this facade is a dead facade, and all this facade is the activity facade. At the time, we were doing other competitions, and then our proposal was to put the course here and here. By doing this simple thing of rotating 90 degrees, then these guys exit directly here, these guys exit directly here, and this is not anymore a corridor. You can be a corridor or not, and then the same thing here. No? These guys exit here, these guys exit here, and these guys are not anymore a corridor because nobody needs to go there. And that's how we started the competition. No? That was like the strategical decision that we did. This, of course, has a lot of consequences, because what happened is that suddenly we had a lot of square meters, because everybody was having corridor and we were having uses. And this what allowed us is to put an extra thing, and that's what I think is important of the topic of today. Like, precisely by using the architectural tools, no, the inside of the architecture, like the fucking fire regulations, by using that, you allow the possibility to give more things. No, what we said is we're going to give what we call the bubbles of air. No, so we created this space, which was a space which was not demanded, but for us was very important. We said that the caserne connects the river on one level and the plaza on the other level. But we didn't want only a connection, we wanted a place to stay. And by winning all these square meters, we were able to carve this space here. We were able to carve this space here that will become a proper sala, because they were asking for a sala of 3 meters, and we were like, hey, that doesn't make sense. So we were able to carve this space again, and we were able also to carve a space here that I will show you later. So that's basically the competition, the project. This is also funny because this is also talking about autonomy. No, what is this? This is a model that we do in the office to understand the project. No, and suddenly we bring it to the politics, and the politics is like, wow. No, now the next thing is that this is going to be exposed on a public thing. No, it's also like how a lot of times you just think for yourself, and this becomes something that the politics can use. So you can see that the building at the end is quite clear. No, you see the two cores. You see what we call the Raumgruppen that work here and that work here. And then in the center, we also thought that by doing this, you create like 3 houses. No, this house has this core, this house has this core, and this house has the existing core that you see here on the back. So you have the main rooms here, and here the big 3 rooms. The plaza, which was the space that was not demanded. This is a new social space, no consume, everybody can be there. The big question here was also, where is the people in winter? No? In summer it's very clear, they're all here in the river. Where is the people in winter? So what we said, okay, what we need to create is a covered plaza, it's a place for people to go in winter. On top of this plaza is the sala, and on top of this we have the program. And then the two houses on the side. So I explained how we did the regulations, no? This strategical position of putting two cores that allows that the fire regulations work very well. This, of course, stiffens the whole building and works also for the earthquake. We explained also how do we use it into a new thing. And the third thing that they were asking us is how to cross, no? How to connect these two buildings. In the competition, they were proposing to demolish this guy, which we thought it was a big, big mistake because then you will lose the concept of ensemble, which is a main thing in the plaza. But we still thought that we needed a place here, no? So at the end, what we thought also like every urban decision cannot be unitary. No? You cannot say to the people, hey guys, all of you go here. No? If you want to be urban, if you want to be social, you have to allow multiplicity. No? And that's what we did. So you had the main thing inside the building, which will be closed at night. But then you will have this one on the side that will always be open. Then you have another one which was linked to neighborhood use, which now is the mosque. The mosque is now part of our project. And then you have the internal communications of the building. And this allowed, what we said is made the building a porous building. No? Before you will arrive to the plaza, you will have the big building there, a little bit scary. And by doing this, by proposing a lot of different connections, what we did is we animated the building, and the building becomes like a sponge, no? A building that in different moments allows different people to cross in different ways. And this for us is also very important, this idea of multiplicity. Those were the images that we did for the competition that tried to explain a little bit how the building is. No? There was also like a very strategical decision, which is, as I said before, we work in Switzerland. No? And in Switzerland, we are in a good moment economically, but this also forces you to work inside the system. And we knew that the jury will be the politics. No? So at the end, your images also become a tool of communication for a certain specific people. So this was this is the corridor, no? Showing how the corridor is not anymore a corridor. There is no any more yellow lines, and the people can really use this thing and activate also the facade to the plaza. This is what we were saying before, no? The ensemble that we needed to keep, that was very important for us. And the small hole that we do here, or big hole, this depends on the day and on the article of the newspaper, that allows the people to go all the time and keep the ensemble. Then the Rhine, the picture on the other side, no? Also the connection, the inside connection, and how do we activate by bringing all the windows down. We allowed all the restaurants and all the galleries to show and to flood this space with new uses. And this, which was of course our main space or our more strategical thing, no? Like in between this space and this space, what we do is we offer a third space. No? It was not anymore crossing, it's not anymore making the building disappear, it was to create another thing in the middle. Politics. So we won this like 2.5 years ago or something like this. It's a very long process with a lot of different actors. And it's funny because the way we talk about the building and the way we explain it is mainly about non-pure architectural questions. No? It's like connection can be architecture or can be sociology, or use of the thing, program is architecture or can be whatever it else. No? And the funny thing is that right now we are in a phase where to defend all these things that we created, we have to be super architectural. No? And the kind of renders that we are doing right now are this kind of renders. Because now we have to, they said, okay, you won, it's good, but now tell us what you do. Tell us how expensive it is. Tell us what are the materials. Tell us, and then the discussion, it's funny because it's to defend a non-architectural decision shifts completely into the architectural. No? Now, this is, you can see it's the view of the plaza. The idea of bringing the outside pavement to the inside, no? This concept of how to make an inside and outside is the plaza. No? It's also like The choice of the materials are also very significant. You choose one thing or another thing and you are saying different things. The stair going down, that becomes a place to stay. This is also the plaza, no? And how in the plaza we take the existing puts, which is something like this, no? And we cover it with a thicker one that you really feel that you are on the outside. And also like starting to go in the detail, no? To say, okay, the walls change in the building, no? In thickness. So you start also somehow to show different lines and to reveal the history of the building. This is the sala, no? In the sala, it's a much more, how you were calling it before, materiality and authenticity. And then it's the existing walls that are basically just reparated. We take out the existing thing, we repair it locally, and we paint it with a lasur, and how it's the other facade, no, with the place where you enter, and this new balcony that appears that also explains how is the verticality of the space. This is the course, no? I think Omar published this image the other day. So the course. This is also because at the beginning we received this invitation from you, no? Yeah, it's about the autonomy. So we thought it was about the autonomy of the object, no? Which is also you brought today, and I think you also brought a little bit today. And we were thinking, because there's also something beautiful about the project, which is, at the beginning it was like, hey, but Quaderns is not an autonomous project, because the main thing is that it connects everything and it's part of an ensemble. But then we started to realize, no, in fact it is an autonomous building. It has some rules that define it, and the first thing that we have to do is to know what are the autonomy of this building, and then try to crack the code. No, we always talk about this thing like cracking the code. And then the beauty also is that inside this unique and this uniform object, we start to create objects inside, and each of them is independent. No? And those are the cores that we were talking before, but they become in a red concrete, almost like in Basel, all the public buildings are red, because the red stone was the thing which was expensive, and that is why the power has to show always that is the power, and they do it in the expensive way. So we said, let's try to think that the whole building was that in this red stone, and what we do is we carve this space in the middle. No? And those are the rooms, that the rooms basically stay as it is, and we talk to them on a much more applied surface, like we apply a cable channel that goes down, maybe also in this materiality that we were saying before. The absorption is really panels applied that also help us to diffuse the light, and this is a much more easygoing, and we understand that this thing will change a lot. No? We always say that the building already lived 150 years old, and what we do now should also be for 150 years. No? And the building was able to live many lives, and I was showing at the beginning all these different rooms, and we said, yeah, these rooms should also be different in the future. No? So we basically leave the things as it is, we repair them when we need it, and we allow also what are the rules that people will change it. So, as I said, no. Basel, super political place, leftish culture. We had to work in there. And what do we think about the topic? No, we like a lot this image. This is the Hans Hollein. No, how's his name? Hans Hollein is a guy from Austria. Quite crazy, and he was totally autonomous, no? And I think that the image shows, I mean, he's trying to show how you can work outside connected to everybody, but at the end, it's showing like, okay, the fucking architect is inside his bubble, and the cameras are filming him. So we think that architecture should not be autonomous, no? For us, it's very easy to say. First, because we are two. So the autonomy is sometimes under pressure, we do by discussing, no? And not only between us, but also with the network, no? Like people doing renderings here, the landscape in Zurich, the structural engineering in Basel. So there's a constant discussion in the whole thing. Second, this is like the first sphere, which is us. Second sphere is the user, no? We said that how do we start the caserne? We start by going there and looking at it, no? And this, I think, that's also the moment, no? I liked a lot also when you were saying that the birds don't give a shit about the shape, no? And then that's something that you go there. Or when you were saying that you try to do things and then that they keep living without you, no? So there is a second sphere, which is the user, that the person, and then there's a third sphere, which is the society, no? Like in Caserne, they didn't ask for this public space, no? But I think as architects, we have like we have to be politically engaged, and we have to be like a seismographer and understand also what is the thing that is happening there and how can you relate to that. At the same time, we wanted to put like this picture of the Parthenon, no? Architecture operates with its specific tools, no? We want to make the world a better place, this is clear, but we have to make it within the architecture. I cannot make it within the politics, I cannot make it within the doctor, because I'm not an architect, I'm not a doctor, no? And this for us is also important, and I think this is also very important for us because, as I was saying before, we work on a very strong framework, no? Like the competitions are there, and when you do a competition, architects will check what you're doing, so somehow you are within the system, no? And that somehow, maybe I invite a little bit of you, that you are maybe a little bit more able to be a little more free, and we have to operate hardcore inside the architecture tools. And this for us, so we think that there is a need. We should not be autonomous, no? At the same time, we have a certain tools that are the tools that we operate with. And then how we think at the end is the way you do, what you do with these tools is what will make that your thing is autonomous or not, political or not, no? And we always talk about soft radicality. We think that the first thing is that we as architects need to be politically engaged, no? We need to know that what we do at the end makes society on one side and on another side, especially in projects like this, no? And we know that at the same time, we work in a very hardcore political environment that you cannot just arrive and break it, no? So we like to be, we always like to say that we try to say strong concepts hidden in between beautiful words. So that was it. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you all for your presentations. I'm going to try, I think that the topic is really wide. I've been reading these last days about it, like rereading some text, and I think that the concept of autonomy can be seen from many, many perspectives. I have to confess that I force a little bit about the political issue, and I know that Eduardo is not comfortable with it, so maybe we can be a little bit picky with that. But it's true that I don't want to end up in a super tough or theoretical talk. I prefer to keep it like fresh and to open up new meanings of autonomy. It has been really interesting how Miguel has presented the last topic, because he has opened up also the idea of the autonomy in the discipline. And let me explain you just an anecdote that I remember when Enrique asked me to talk about autonomy. And of course, one asks oneself, can architecture be autonomous? It's quite a question. In other words, I would ask myself, can it solve all our needs? Like, architecture by itself can, enclosing itself even from the context, solve everything. And by context, I mean not the territorial context, not like the physical context, but rather the cultural context, the economical context. So can it be really, really autonomous from anything and solve everything? In relation to that, let me explain you an anecdote. Bernini was asked by Louis XIV, Louis XIV, to design the Louvre. When Bernini presented the project, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who was at the time the financial advisor, answered to Bernini that the project was not good at all, basically because he didn't take into consideration practical issues as comfort or even how the food was going to end up in the palace and the Louvre and so on. So Bernini, he didn't care about program, he didn't care about anything like that. What is curious is that actually Bernini answered quite, let's say, angry with Colbert critique, basically because he thought that architecture was not about that at all. And he answered, that's not my job. Somebody, I mean, the interior at that time, the functional things at that time, the economical things at that time, was not related to architecture. And I heard this anecdote from Pierpaolo Tamburelli, San Rocco's editor, and from Baucu, and he pointed out quite an interesting argument. What has happened after that? So what has happened to us nowadays, that nowadays architecture has to solve everything, right? We have to take care of everything, and that's something that has been built, culturally construct during the 20th century. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to consider that we don't have to take care of comfort, for instance, right? So I think that at that point, he started to, like, if you consider at that time, architecture was autonomous. It was not. It was totally dependent in the time of Bernini, because it was dependent on other disciplines to solve other issues. It's nowadays, in the modern times, or in contemporary times, that it's really autonomous. And I thought that in Switzerland, and I'm like pointing to you because it was this in between autonomous and not autonomous. So to what point in a society that has such a big participation, and that of course architecture is slow in terms of the process of design, but also because it implies a lot of people and a lot of discussion and consensus and dissensus. So I thought that somehow we were coming back to a Bernini, state of the art of architecture in that moment, that it's totally, totally not autonomous. So I will let you talk about it, because you were like pointing out how at one point, so to what point you are autonomous in the process of design, and to what point you are not?
Yes, so in terms of design, I think the autonomy that we have, we take freedom, I would say, in terms of design. But in terms of the consequences of the design, there we have to face the Swiss political system, which is, of course, extremely participative, as we know. And it's a very powerful tool that can actually influence projects, specifically in Switzerland. I don't know how is the situation in Spain, but a lot of projects, and especially also all projects, can be subject to something that is called a referendum, which is it's a votation, so the people can call for a vote. If they don't agree with a project, they can call for a vote on a project, and they can basically decide if public projects can be built or not. So that's where the autonomy somehow of the design stops. And of course there is then the question is that, do you think about this when you're designing? Do you think about am I going to make a project that is able to survive until the end, or able to survive Swiss democracy? No, we don't. I mean, we don't. But specifically for the Kaserne, I think for this project, it's a very special project. It's a hyper-political project. It's a project where actually the city has been discussing about it since the last 50 years. And everybody in Basel actually has his own opinion about it. So we have here, yeah, some people want to tear down the building, and then you have the historic buildings, people that want to keep it like it is and don't change anything. So in the process that we did, this, which is very specific actually also for this project, is that we somehow tried to hear the voices of a little bit of everybody and to distillate it in a project that we thought could be the best. And yes, in these terms actually, our design decisions were not autonomous, because they came from actually the voices that we knew, because we had actually these people on board that we called like the political consultants or cultural consultants. Like you take consultants for facade, for energy, And we were actually the only team that actually took people from the culture to help us think and understand what are the critical issues, the critical discussions that are coming from the cultural scene, the possible users, and also from the city. So in a way, we hear the different voices, and it gave us actually a very strong input also in the design. So yes, we are actually quite subjected to the environment we are working in fact, yeah, could say.
For me, it was quite interesting to, I wanted to, basically the concept of politics here and of how architecture can be political is totally related with Rossi. That's why when I emailed you to start this talk, I wanted this out. So it was not for free, let's say. It's nothing that I would take out from my pocket. But on the other hand, I thought that there was a kind of a link of how do we work in relation to our social context and in between your practice and Assemble, because it's totally different, right? So your work is more a bottom-up system, let's say, and the other one is, let's say, more institutionalized and more accepted, let's say, that it's formalized legal. So that's why I thought that it was a good topic to point out. Quoting Rossi, as the ones that you haven't read him, he actually points out that architecture, let's say, it's as an autonomous discipline allows the political to take place. So architecture is not political by means like the form, so a building can change through his time by different political meanings. The same building can be, let's say, capitalist or communist, it doesn't matter. So the form is free, independent in relation to, it's autonomous in relation to the political. But we also could consider, and taking a look to your work, of course, that architecture can be a political tool by means of consensus and dissensus of practicing. So at the end, when we build a wall or when we paint a window, it's somehow a political gesture. So James, I wanted to ask you, when does architecture becomes political, and if you think that can be political?
Well, I think I think you're right. There are things, for example, when people in that project I showed in Liverpool kind of paint their, kind of domesticate this sort of security architecture by, kind of painting it in a certain way, then that's a political act, but that's not something that we did, and that's not something that we kind of would have come in ever, I think, and sort of suggested. So it exists in a very different space, I think, and whether, I think really architecture has limited agency about, it doesn't really get to decide whether it's political or not, where Tony Blair's legacy and of his kind of government is going around and giving kind of every regional city some kind of sculptural, blobby museum that may or may not have any real use, but it's this kind. There was something very political about that, in the same way that regeneration as an idea in the UK is an incredibly kind of politically loaded term. It's an attitude which isn't. It's not about the architecture or the planning really. It's about there's a huge industry of construction which needs to kind of feed itself through constant construction or whatever, and that's a political reality when you have people advising the government on the built environment or in the construction industry. That's what you are going to get, and so often I feel like it's not very common that a building or a piece of architecture has the opportunity to make a political statement, but it can certainly be employed as a political tool. I don't think really any of our projects are kind of explicitly political. It's something which was asked a lot around the time that we did the first project, was are you a bunch of kind of 21-year-olds like making some really bold political statement? And we weren't at all. It was very much a reaction to a context and a climate and what we felt we were taught. And architecture schools are very political environments, that they are a bit like Basel, kind of hothouses for all the kind of leftists who are too frustrated to stay in practice, kind of end up instilling the most left beliefs in the next generation, So I think certainly we have political kind of, quite a strong sense of our own politics as a group, but I don't feel, I think it comes more in a kind of a public project like Goldsmiths or any of our projects. Really, the conversation is usually about a sense more of like a social responsibility for the decisions that you make and how they may be used. And certainly like you try to anticipate or make a judgment about which projects you feel you should be involved with, but you don't really know how that's gonna kind of work out. Or as you say, like who gets to make the decision about whether a project goes ahead, and if it's a different government in 2 years' time to the one which gave the project the go ahead, it could be decision that will influence the decisions that may be around that are in a very different way. So I just don't really feel architecture very often has the choice about how it's framed within that discussion.
It was actually really curious, and I wanted to point it out because both of you talk about the operative, being autonomous an operative tool, and I would never join your practices with the same perspective rather than yours, but it's true that it's super important in a certain moment to be autonomous from fashion, as you were mentioning. And I felt quite guilty because I really like your TDA house and not that much the Catalan houses, so I totally feel Catalan in that sense. The Mexican ones are, so for me it's a really, really harsh critique to the sense that to which point we are not autonomous from our cultural context, and to which point, how important can it be to be autonomous? And I'm just pointing this out, but I was not going to ask you that, Eduardo. I was going to ask you about politics, because you were asking me before, what is politics for you? And I was like, okay. Probably politics for me is that what goes beyond physicality. So architecture becomes something political when it involves social change. So it's not only about its physicality in a certain moment, but as you change something that changed at the end the whole neighborhood to one way or to the other. But in that sense, I think it's political. I don't know if you agree.
Can you hear me? Yes, I think I have. In an abstract way, let's say, there's a difference between la política, I don't know how to translate it in English, and lo político. La política is the mechanism, the trash, the politicians, the tricks, all those things. And lo político are the relationships. And lo político is everything. That's why I was asking for precision, because if not, you can be in any spot, in any point. So as a political thing, meaning as a medium that deals with different realities, it's totally political or totally political. Not la política. La política is the trash, is the dirty tricks, the corrupt politicians. Lo político is what is important. So in a way, and lo político is everywhere. It's in a personal relationship, in a social relationship, it's everywhere. That's the origin of the word politics. So in a way, I think it's always it's always present, that we are at the end up dealing with relationships and with the conditions in which we develop our office. You know, we do the houses that we do in Mexico because the normativa allows for it. To do a lot of the houses that way in here, it's a fake. And if you know about construction, you know it's fake, and it's double walls and ta-da-da, ta-da-da, ta-da-da. So if we wanted to do a concrete house in here, which we did because someone called us and said that, asked if we were experts in concrete, and of course we said yes. Why not? But we didn't want to use those tricks, or even I was wondering, and I was very interested in his presentation, and how I really like two things: that he used the word company in a certain moment, and also that about everything. The quality of the work was amazing, but also how they funded through a different discipline, so through arts, and how you can deal with that. So I think it's based on the environment that you operate. If you try to operate like they do in Mexico, you will be bankrupt in 1 week because there's no funding, there's no way to operate. If you want to do a building in Switzerland, in other world, you will not be able to do it. Either you go through the right channels or not. So at the end, I think it depends on the context in which you operate, and in that sense, the relationships that you build to solve certain things is the way in which an architect, for me, operates like a guerrillero, like a guerrilla thing, in which you have certain amount of knowledge and you use them in many different ways. It can be towards, I don't agree with the bottom up, by the way, because I don't think it's very it's at the end technical knowledge applied to society. That's what we do. That's why we train students technical. That's why they spend a lot of time doing that. And if you use a painter to do architecture, it's either very inefficient or you're invading other disciplines, and which is fine, but means another level of discussion. So at the end, I mean, just to conclude, I would say that everything is political. I don't know if the word political is the right translation. That's why I want to use it in English. And the important part about political is the relationships that you can build, either in space or socially, and that's for me architecture.
Thank you. I would answer you because it actually I agree and not agree in the sense that it can be seen another way, like Rossi says, that basically form is not even la political, ni lo political. No, like it's an absolute autonomous thing. But I think that I would give my answer for the beers, and
okay.
I'd like to discuss that with you, and we can be discussing for hours. And I want to open up some discussion to the public. I don't know if anyone has any question. Feel free to ask, and I me ofrezco a traducir. If you wanna, si queréis preguntar en castellano o catalán. Any question?
Are you talking about how political or not political architecture is? I mean, the projects that you show from Mexico are, to me, completely political. It's like a bunch of really thin houses in a country which is recently rich, and it's obviously propaganda of your own country. So for me, it's it cannot be more political than that. And it also is something that historically has happened in the US. And on the other hand, it's a sample project, which in a very naive way, the first project that you did is a completely political project because you show how people want to use urban space. So I think there's two examples of how political architecture can be. And I don't know, you probably don't agree with this.
What was your question? What was the point that rich houses?
I was surprised that it's a question that if architecture is political or is not political. Because to me, one, like work from assembler, it's very, the first job that I did, which was people, they make like a urban space completely for people. And you guys maybe in a naive way, you're making a statement on how people want to use public space. And on the other hand, there is your work, which is amazing, like all the houses are like super beautiful. But it's also a show that is a country that is in development and it's like really rich now, and you also want to show into the world. And this is also a very political statement of really nice houses made out of concrete, which shows like progression and new architecture.
No, so two things. Architecture is part of a construction. And construction is part of the economy that creates millions and millions of jobs. And if we want to play and say that we will save society by building schools in favelas, it's fine. But you need to find and build jobs for the fathers of those kids. And construction, which we are part of it, in a minimum way, even if we want to say that, it's responsible for huge amounts of jobs, huge amount of taxes that at the end pay for the favelas, the theaters, the funds for the arts. And then we are a tiny piece, and of course we're political. We are part of that industry. And that industry, for example, we were happy in a way that Aravena invited us to be in the official selection of the Biennale. And we took a decision of showing like the entire palette of housing projects that we're doing in Mexico, the buildings. And explaining that it goes from like a high-end building, like the last one that I showed, the white one that I showed is like art directors and movie. And then the first one is going to be social housing. All of them are necessary. All of them are part of it. The houses that we do, concrete in Mexico is very cheap. In fact, that's why we use it. Because it's one of the, and that's why I said that it was weird in Spain, because it's very expensive. But when we did it in Spain, it was an entrepreneur from Argentina that wanted to bring a new construction system in the middle of the crisis. So we did, the X-house was built with one frame of concrete and projected shotcrete. He was trying to make it more efficient and more, so you can say one story of, for example, the X-house through the form and through tarara, and you can say another history of the X-house through what they was trying to do in the middle of the crisis in Spain, someone that bet to bring a new construction system and created jobs. So for me, at least the way I see it, I belong to that system. And I'm a tiny piece. And if everybody does their job in a nice way or the best way they can, society will be better. If we want to play that we will save the world by building or by moving our best students to go to work in favelas, which is totally necessary, of course, I'm not saying not, but we shouldn't forget about the other thing. Because the other thing is also part of the system. And for me is the idea of the favela, the architect that saves the favela, is a New Start system. It's of course a New Start system. I don't know if you remember when the Anupama Kundu was published in Babelia. She was in the cover. Her face, like Ola, or like any other, you know? It's like, no, why don't you show the work or the social implications or the amount of work that it generates? Or so in a way, when I'm, this huge building that we won, it's gonna generate thousands of jobs. And it's not me, I'm not the saver, I'm just doing the form and the strategy, but I'm part of that thing. So, and of course, and for, that's the way I see architecture, as a tiny piece, and those houses generate jobs. For example, one thing that we try to do with the houses is the same way that exists fair commerce, we try to do fair architecture. So they get paid a lot because clients want to build them really quick and say, okay, perfect, pay over time. And if you pay over time, you will, build it very fast. So most of those houses buy that in 90% of the cases, I know that it looks more fancy, but in 90% of the cases are professionals, like normal professionals. They do more for the people that work on them in the industry. So that's for me the key part of architecture. And in that sense, for me, can be more abstracted from a political issue than from being part of a system that builds the world in the wrong way and in the right way in both of them.
It's just very short and referring to autonomy today. What's been to me really interesting is to appreciate in the end that it's not about autonomy, but maybe the processes that lead you to the project and the commission and finally the building. But when this happens, and in the end you have the object, we have architecture, what remains is there. Okay? It has a degree of autonomy that's still in the realm of architecture. But seeing what can happen in Mexico, Switzerland, or the UK, what's clear is that there's an increasing complexity in processes. And that is not something that has come up today in this conversation, and that has been really interesting.
One last question.
I just want to say a small thing. Hi. Oops. It works? No. See? Okay. Yeah. It goes for a sample. And I live in London for a long time, and I live in the East End. And at the same time, that progressively, I live day by day the effects of new projects and massive buildings, and literally feel invaded by scale and material proportions. Obviously, I had the opportunity to look at certain tradition of the English society that obviously we can say now for a few decades is been apparently dismantled. And I think one thing about the socialism, or even the previous, like someone like William Morris and his mate, that I forget at the moment, Ruskin. Like this idea of making of architecture, urbanism, design, something more kind of like to a level of a human scale versus the big, exactly the big politicians that trade with massive amounts of budget and big kind of court projects, like even you can look at Haussmannization of Paris, etc. So I was just thinking that I really like that you happen to be at the moment someone active, because you are reminding in a contrast at the moment when from the heart of London is something like this sort of like between Hong Kong and I don't know, sci-fi something. It's literally rising and stepping over our necks. And I am one of the people who is complaining about that. So I wanted to remind that, of course, there's politics, and of course there's honesty or no, or there's a sort of blind egoism, not the autonomy of the guy who says, I'm fine, I make great stuff, I don't fucking care, no? So, and into that I will point the new architects that they are actually complicit into making of some of our areas and neighborhoods a horror, literally a horror of a day life. So that's a small post-commented.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, when I graduated in 2009 and went to work, you know, for somebody that had done plenty of good stuff before, and, you know, he was faced with a decision, pretty much like you said. He had an office of 30 people, and he was like, you know, I can say yes to any offers that come in, or I can say no and, like, stick to my principles and, like, wait for the next great art gallery to come along, you know. And he made a decision that actually these you know, he sacrificed essentially, like, his architectural principles and started doing any work that he would do, you know, refurbing 80s offices in Brighton and everything, you know. And I think it's a very, you know, I don't feel like we're not particularly idealistic, you know, as Ensemble. Like, you know, we come from a very different place, and then we started very, you know, where we weren't fully qualified, and so gradually the projects are kind of going in as a necessity in order to acquire the specific tools through working through the scales in some ways. We weren't in a position to try and take on big projects, but it's not. I think there's a danger in reading into things, into some of the work that we've done, that, you know, we feel that, you know, small and bottom up is the only way. It's an approach. No, I'm not suggesting that, but I think it's, you know, I mean, that's the scale at which we've been able to, that we feel has been appropriate, and the way in which people would, you know, people aren't going to give us the job of master planning London, you know.
But
so,
for example, in London you have that amazing, you know, the estate.
The boundary estate or something.
Yes,
yeah.
around the, you know, the.
Yeah.
So I think it has a tradition, like the Barbican example, whatever.
Yeah.
It has a tradition of social housing, looking for the, you know, I think when you take that state, so that problematics in Europe, it's not a surprise that you're in, it happens in England, because it's quite specific politics, and then, you know, something like that maybe would never occur in Mexico. If it occurs with the opportunity of the guy who was like a missionary and a visionero, no? I'm doing the favelas, I'm so cool, and it's just pure hypocrisy, no? But I was just thinking about the tradition, no, of socially conscious urbanism, the sort of more like, and also the option to decide to use corrupting materials or corruption a tool as well in architecture. Like, we got a lot of cases of corruption, like literally like Villa Olímpica in Barcelona, buildings started to have this something going on in their walls that it was all fucked up, and that was a massive amount of material and works and jobs and people building something that was corrupt. Okay, so that's the kind of things I think. Politics.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get away from it.
Decisions as studio architects can make, you know, should we work with the corrupt material that we get provided by, or we don't work with the corrupt material.
Thank you very much. I think it's time to go. I left in my pocket a lot of topics, like we haven't talked about editora really today, and oh my god, or about August, right? But I think that we can chat about that upstairs with some beers. Thank you all for coming. Great talks. Thank you.